The Porsche Boxster. It seems like a staple in the Porsche family, but it's actually been 25 years since the debut of the very first Boxster, which landed on the shores here in the US in 1997. Today we're going to be doing a little drive and compare with an original first generation 1997 Boxster, along with a brand new 2021 Porsche Boxster 718 GTS. That's a new 4-liter car, 60% more power than the original 201 horsepower, 2.5-liter Boxster. I'm pretty excited to put these two cars through their paces, see what stayed the same, what's evolved. Am I going to see the same DNA, or they can be hard to even tell they're from the same family? This is going to be a great opportunity to talk about what was wonderful about the Porsche Boxster, some of the history, where it's gone, and then see the latest and greatest. So I'm excited to take this drive with you today.
This video is made possible with help from Leland West, pleasure use insurance for Porsches, endorsed by PCA since 1992.
So the 986 Boxster, this example we have here today is a 1997, so it's the first year here in the US. They were introduced in 1996 in the European market, 1997 for the US market. But this particular car I'm excited to have because it is in the iconic color combination, Arctic Silver exterior, Boxster red interior. For those nerds of history like I am, you'll recall this is the exact color combination. This car debuted at the Detroit Auto Show in 1993. It's hard to remember back at that time, but the level of excitement that was out there in the market when they introduced this car was unbelievable. You got to remember, Porsche had not introduced a brand new clean sheet design car since 1977. Right, with the 924 and then the subsequent introduction of the 928. So Porsche was not introducing a lot of new models in this time period. So to announce a completely new model, completely new architecture, and then the design study was absolutely gorgeous, caused a lot of attention. And I really want to give Porsche credit because a lot of times we see prototypes from auto manufacturers, and then when they actually hit the street, they almost look nothing like the prototype. They really stuck to the original design, and that's really evident again when you see this particular color combination. So a lot of things about these cars cause some controversy. Some people love them, some people think otherwise. I think actually now looking at them and 25 years later, this design has aged really, really well. So I'm standing here, so we're going to talk a little bit about the headlights. The headlights, of course, everyone has an opinion. Some people jokingly call them the frying eggs. If you will, particularly the early cars with the orange indicators in here. But to me, I like them. The Porsche GT1 tie-in with these headlights. And again, there's an elegance to this car, a simplicity. We're going to talk a little bit more how the design language has changed over time. But I think when we look at this design in retrospect, sometimes when we look at any particular product, it looks better when we look at it in relation to history. So when this was brand new, it was such a change. There was a lot of excitement around it, but not everyone embraced it as fully as I think they are now. I think people are realizing this is such an elegant car. It's very smooth-sided. It doesn't have a lot of flares, doesn't have a lot of vents. It's not been sort of pulled and tugged at every angle. It just looks like a traditional sports car, but maintains a lot of the Porsche design language. Even something as simple as how the fender rolls. This ties in with the 911. And just a car that really set the world on edge. Originally, these cost just under $40,000 in 1997. So inflation adjusted, really the pricing has stayed about the same on the Boxster over time. Interior-wise, again, Boxster red interior. This car, to me, if it had the black interior or the gray interior, would not have anywhere near the visual pop it does with this particular configuration. I really can almost say nothing bad about these cars. They're just a simple and pure expression of what a sports car should be like. I'll be really excited to talk to you about the 2021 and all the things that have changed. But if you have not had the opportunity to sample an original Porsche Boxster, even in this 2.5-liter form, I would absolutely encourage you to go drive this car. Now, we talked a little bit about the history and the design of the Boxster, but lest you think it's not about performance, we're going to miss something really important. So with Porsche, it's all about the drive. And of course, the drive has a lot to do with how the car is designed, what the performance potential is, so what Porsche did. So let's talk a little bit about the name because it ties right into it. Boxster, basically what Porsche says, we have a Boxster engine, and we have a roadster. We're going to make a name. We're going to call this thing the Boxster. So kind of interesting. It's actually the first time Porsche actually gave their model just a name and not a number. So again, Boxster, we have a flat six engine. Very first time we had a water-cooled flat six in a production car for Porsche. Mid-engine, so we have a weight distribution which is 4951. These cars were not tremendously powerful, but again, 25 years ago, the standard was also a little bit different. You know, for example, in 1997, the 993 made 282 horsepower. These made 201 horsepower out of 2.5 liters, water-cooled, dual overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder, Boxster engine, either a 5-speed manual gearbox or a 5-speed automatic Tiptronic gearbox. Of course, rear-wheel drive as God intended a car to be. And really, I've long said if Porsche introduced this car first, I don't know if the traditional 911 would exist. I think the layout being mid-engine conveys a lot of advantages in terms of just polar movement, how the car reacts at speed, how it handles at the absolute limit. And then functionally, of course, the advantage you get is you get a rear trunk and a front trunk. So a 986 Boxster shares most everything this far forward to the 996, which Porsche introduced the very next year in 1999. But obviously, everything aft is changed. Motor located in the center versus motor in the rear. So it'll be interesting when we go drive this car today. Will I feel like 201 horsepower in 2021 is adequate? Will this still feel like a sporting car, or will I feel like I'm driving a minivan, right? I don't think I'll think that. I'm kind of a purist. I like a car that's more of a momentum car. So it'll be interesting to compare that to the new 394 horsepower GTS. Imagine that. That's a Boxster that has almost twice the power of this original model. So I can't wait for you guys to hear my on-the-road impression. So now it's 2021. Has Porsche stood still? Has the Boxster developed over time? Well, certainly it has. Behind me, we have the new 2021 Boxster GTS. We were hoping we were going to get the anniversary model, but it's not on the ground yet, so they're going to base the new 25th anniversary model off this exact car. A lot of people said, why aren't you using the new Spider? And I said, well, we want to feature the car that Porsche picked to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Boxster. This is a really amazing car. I want to talk to you a little bit about where the DNA is, what's developed over time. So we're going to walk through this Genetian blue example. A couple big things to know. Huge increase in performance almost across the board. I mean, that almost seems obvious. We're in a horsepower race. If you don't know it, this is the most amazing time to be in internal combustion engines right now. It may be the end of an era, but we're going to go out with a bang. 394 horsepower, again, compared to the 201 horsepower of the original Boxster. That's almost twice as much power. The original Boxster came on a base 16-inch wheel, 20-inch wheel on this car, so we got 4 inches more wheel, way more brake, way more suspension, 6-speed manual gearbox. Again, they've just expanded everything that they've done. And most importantly, they've stayed true to the design concept, the mid-engine car. This is very much a driver's car. Sometimes what happens is as cars evolve, they become more GT, they become bigger, they become heavier. And one thing that Porsche has done a great job is, yes, the car is physically bigger than a 986, but it really has not put on a lot of weight, even though you've added all this performance, all this technology, and that's because aluminum structure, they've just been much better able to use the materials and engineering to keep the weight down. So this still feels like a spiritual successor to the original Boxster. It managed to feel light and lively and fun in a way so many other cars, when I compare original cars and I fast forward 20 or 25 years, and they feel like a bloated version of themselves. Porsche has done a great job of keeping this car svelte and fun, light, even in a way that, for example, the 992 feels a little bit more transition to a GT or a GT type feel. This feels like a true sports car. Again, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive as God intends the sports car to be. Manual gearbox in this example, although you can option these with a PDK. That is one area that's a tremendous improvement. The original Boxster used a Tiptronic, a very standard automatic transmission, PDK, a double clutch. But whether you got an original Boxster with a 5-speed manual, this car, the 6-speed manual, super slick shifting, just amazing car to drive, a delight to drive. I'm going to be thrilled to take this car out on the road and basically say, is there a reason to own a 986 Boxster when you can have one of these? Or is this a poor interpretation of what the original design feels like? I don't know. I could see a good answer for either way, right? Maybe this car is so far surpassed the 986 that no longer has a place, or maybe the original is so pure, so correct to its original intent and purpose, the spirit of the car. That's what I'm going to go tease out. We're going to go put these cars on some aggressive 2-lane road, and we're just going to go have fun, and we're going to see what we think. Well, today we're going to be driving this very first 986 Porsche Boxster. It's a 1997 model, actually in kind of the debut colors, Arctic Silver over Boxster Red interior, equipped, of course, with a 5-speed manual transmission, 2.5 liter, 201 horsepower, flat 6 motor. This is the essence of Boxster. For those who don't know, the name Boxster comes from a combination of the Boxer style motor along with roadster. So Porsche merged those terms, and instead of using a numerical name like a 911 or a 928, they coined the term Boxster. The world first saw this car at the 1993 auto show in Detroit, and it really got people talking. And so we're going to drive this car. It's been quite some time since I've driven a first year 2.5 liter Boxster, so I just can't wait to go drive this car as Porsche intended, and then compare that 25 years later to the new Boxster GTS. So here we go. One of the amazing things about the original Boxster, what it lacks in absolute thrust or horsepower, the audio soundtrack in this car, the 2.5 liter, really to me feels spiritually akin to some of the early 911 small displacement motors. It has just a real revvy, happy nature. It really rewards keeping up in the rev band, which is of course really important because it doesn't make a lot of torque. Total torque on these cars, think about 181 foot-pounds of torque. So you got to keep the revs going, but it rewards you because it sounds so good, particularly north of 5,000 RPM. You just want to keep going there again and then again and again. So that's one of the rewarding parts of this car. The other things that I really enjoy about the first Boxster, and I think why it was such a success for Porsche, was that they really encapsulated the essence of what a sports car should be. There's not a lot of frills in this car. In fact, if there's anything you could nitpick about it, is it's pretty basic. But I think basic is really what is appealing. No stability control system, no active suspension management, no real trickery to anything how it works. Just a pretty straightforward, pure, light sports car. Originally, Porsche had announced they were going to have a curb weight of about 2,200 pounds. I think they were a little optimistic on that. We're realistically somewhere more like 2,750 pounds. I'd be curious to put this car on the scale. But it feels light. It feels like it wants to be playful, which really is ultimately what a sports car should be about. It should be about taking it out on a 2-lane road and driving the car and becoming one. And that's something that's lost a little bit. I'm going to be really curious when I drive the Boxster GTS here next, because sometimes some of our modern cars have so much horsepower, so much power, so much performance that on a public road you oftentimes can't exploit that car the way you might want to. And that can be kind of frustrating as a driver. Whereas these first generation Boxsters, while they certainly are admirable performers, they don't have so much performance potential that you end up feeling frustrated when you can't drive the car, at or near its limits without being imprudent, if you will. So that's one of the things I really, really enjoy about these cars, is just they're very approachable. The other thing Porsche really got right with these mid-engine cars is they have almost a perfect weight distribution. They're 49%, 51% to the rear weight distribution, so almost 50-50, and they're very forgiving at the limit. So for someone who's newer to Porsche or someone who potentially grew up on front-wheel drive cars, from a handling characteristic perspective, they almost have no vices. Because they're light and they're fairly direct, even at the limit, these things almost seem to just ever so slightly step out, but you almost can't get them to do anything wild or raucous that's going to scare you as a driver. So you can play a little bit with the throttle and steer a little bit there, but just very, very well controlled. So just again, a car that brings a smile on my face every time I drive it. I'd be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to talk a little bit about the development of the Boxster over the last 25 years. Of course, our math majors are going to point out that this is a 1997 model. We're going to be reviewing here shortly the 2021 model, and they'll say, well, that's only 24 years. Well, Porsche did introduce this car in the European market in 1996, so they are celebrating 25 years with the launch of the new anniversary edition car. So this car lasted until 2004 model year, and then in 2005, Porsche introduced the 987 Boxster. The 987 Boxster really was a fairly derivative model. It did step up a lot of areas that maybe some people initially complained about with this car. Some of the styling cues, I think they brought back a little bit more traditional Porsche styling cues. They improved the quality of the interior of the car, the quality of the plastics and that sort of thing. That was some of the initial feedback. Although interesting, when we step back and we look at this car through a 25-year lens, I view this car maybe more favorably than some of the reviewers did in period. So, for example, the styling of this car, I really, really like the styling of the 986, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I actually prefer it slightly to the later styling of the 987. It's sort of the purity of the original design. When I look at the original prototype from 1993, Porsche really captured it. So many manufacturers, they have a prototype, and then when they come out with the actual car, you almost can't find the prototype in there, and they just did a great job putting that language in there. I really enjoyed what they did with that. The 987, again, they stepped up the performance of the car with each generation they did. So that the first generation, 2005 to 2008 for the 987.1, and then they did the second generation cars, 2009 to 2012. And those cars are pretty derivative. Then when you move to 2013, we introduced the 981, which was a pretty clean sheet design. Shared a lot more with the 991. Oh man, look at this road. This is what a Boxster's meant for. The overall impressions with this car is light. The car is light. The steering is light. It feels really easy to handle in transition. It says, I'm here to play, right? It's not overwhelmingly powerful. I mean, for example, this is wide open throttle, but it rewards it. It feels good. It enjoys it. Shifting is precise, but the lever itself feels a little bit delicate. It almost feels a little bit out of place in these cars. Not a lot of heft to it. For the four-spoke steering wheel on these, I find almost comical. A little bit of a thin rim. Definitely an area Porsche improved over the years. Well, while we're driving this car, we got a little bit of traffic. We might as well talk about some of the things to know about 986 Boxsters. Of course, a lot of people will do a lot of reading, and if you do enough reading about 986 Boxsters, or frankly just about any Porsche, you'll panic yourself into not buying one. So I would encourage you to do some research as to what the known foibles are, but I would not let it discourage you from getting one of these cars. 25 years later, we pretty much know most everything there is to know about these cars. A couple good news points. The early cars, the failure rate on IMS is fairly small on the single row cars, and these early 2.5 liter cars do not suffer from bore scoring, so that's a real win. The other stuff is mostly maintenance items, so get one that's been owned ideally by a Porsche Club member, that you have a good service history, Don't buy the cheapest one you can find. Please don't buy the $6,000 one off Craigslist. But get a good one with a good maintenance history that's been owned by an enthusiast, one that's been loved and taken care of. That's probably the way to go. And then just drive and enjoy the car. Expect to spend, in today's market, they're going up a little bit, but a good early Boxster, somewhere in the realm of $10,000 to $20,000, depending on mileage and so on. So definitely a very approachable car. It'll be very interesting to compare, say this is probably an upper teens Boxster. It's a fairly low mileage example. So this is probably a $17,000 or $18,000 car in the market today, compared to we're going to be driving a brand new $100,000 GTS. So is it 5 times as good of a car? I don't know. You tell me. I can't imagine it would be, because this is pretty epic. Okay, we get to fast forward now 25 years, this 2021 Boxster GTS 4-liter. So let's go see what we think, what Porsche's done in the last 25 years. Have they stood still, or have they kept developing this car? That's the million-dollar question, right? Right away, what's immediately noticeable, when you jump between these two cars, which of course should be obvious, the car's got 60% more power, is just the level of performance offered in this car is an enormous leap forward. Now, with it jumping an enormous leap forward doesn't necessarily make it better, it just makes it more, right? So it's certainly a lot of fun to drive. It makes some amazing noises. Porsche certainly has mastered the art of the exhaust noise on these cars. So yeah, we're going to go out and drive it and see, is it a better car with 60% more power? It might be. We'll see. One thing that you immediately notice on this car is that, again, this performance envelope really stretches the concept of what maybe a prudent driver should be utilizing while on the road. So one thing I would definitely say, if I owned this car, I would be participating in our PCA driver's education program, so I could really experience this car as it should be driven, but in a safe manner. Whereas the original Boxster, I feel like that's a car you could go out and really exploit to a great degree. Let's talk about steering. One of my favorite things about the original Boxster is steering feel. The steering wheel on this car, man, if you could transplant this steering wheel onto a 986, I think you'd actually have the magic combination, because the steering on this car is very linear, it's nice, but it has a lot more weight or heft to it, and I don't necessarily say that in a good or a bad way, but the original Boxster, that's one of the magical things about it, that you sort of give up. I think maybe just as the car gets bigger, it gets a wider track, a little more front rubber on the car, I think you give up some of that feel. So I think I would take the 986 steering feel if I could put the 718 GTS steering wheel behind it. Because again, the 986 steering wheel is a little thin-rimmed and almost feels a little flimsy. Other inputs, shift action on this car, again, a little bit more weight to it. That's kind of an overall feel to the controls. They feel a little more substantial in this generation. But in terms of how direct or positive they are, both cars are great in that regard. Gearing is definitely shorter in the 986, but it needs to be. I mean, this car probably makes more torque at 2,000 RPM than the 986 does at peak. So if I could really improve anything about this car, and this gets talked about, so I don't want to beat a dead horse in this area, but certainly a little bit shorter gear stack. You don't need it for performance, but it just sounds so glorious at 6,000 RPM. You'd like to get there more often, and frankly, on a public road, you just don't get there because the way the gearing is on this car. So the other big change, of course, since 1997 is the advent of all sorts of driver aids. And so, with the 986, it doesn't really have any bad habits, and again, the performance overall is lower, but if you were to get into trouble, it's just you and the car deciding how this is going to end. In this situation, of course, you've got active suspension, and I should say PSM, Porsche Stability Management, with yaw control and all sorts of things. Of course, that are maybe make you feel like a better driver than you really are. And so I'll be honest, for most drivers, I think that's a good thing. I'll even put myself in that category. Sometimes we overcook a corner or we make a bad decision, and the nannies might come and save us. But there's some beauty in sort of knowing it's just you and machine. So I'm not going to downplay safety aids, because I think, again, in most situations they're probably beneficial. But in this situation where, if you want to just see, how can you do with the car, how you want to drive this car at the limit, well then, of course, no aids is the preferred method, right? One other thing that's pretty striking when you drive these cars is just the difference in the technology. 986 really has no driver technology to speak of. In this car, I can change from Sport Plus to Sport mode to Comfort mode to individual mode right here on the steering wheel. So all that stuff is individually selectable. On a road like this, of course, I'm going to put it in Sport Plus mode. I've of course got Apple CarPlay, I've got configurable displays. I mean, it is such a difference in terms of tech. But I'm a driver, so I think this stuff's kind of neat. It's fun to play with, but I'm all about the driving experience. So luckily, Porsche has not forgotten that. There are some other German makes, I will not name them. They might start with a B or an M or maybe a W, and they've kind of lost their way. They've gotten so enamored with technology that they've lost focus on the driver. And Porsche has not lost focus on the driver. The other thing that's interesting is when you drive these two cars is just the leap forward in terms of how I might classify the cars. So to me, a 986 Boxster is what I would consider to be a classic sports car. Again, more of a momentum car. You want to keep your revs up, keep your speed up in the corners, try to maintain momentum, drive it clean. Whereas this almost falls into, performance-wise, what would have been hypercar territory just a few years ago. So it's really quite amazing. I mean, this has a performance envelope more akin to, maybe a 996 or a 993 twin turbo. Obviously different, type of power delivery, but about that same level of performance. Yet it's coming in a Boxster platform. So that's quite a change. So it depends on what you're looking to do. Do these cars feel connected, spiritually connected? Can I tell that I'm in a Boxster in both cases? And the answer is unequivocally yes. They feel very much related. They definitely feel a generation or two or three, is this case, apart. But you can feel sort of the same DNA. And that was sort of interesting because to me, like when the first generation Boxster came out, I definitely knew it was a Porsche, but it was a whole new kind of Porsche. And so I could feel the DNA and some of its engineering, some of its design, the basic premise or how a Porsche approaches performance. But everything else felt uniquely different. Whereas when I jumped from the 986 all the way to this car, the new 718 GTS, it's very much familial. This is a family of cars, they're related. I could definitely see the appeal of having, for example, a first generation Boxster and a latest generation Boxster in the garage. Where does the 986 fit? If you want a purest expression of what a Boxster is all about, I highly recommend an early car. Light steering, light controls, very approachable limits on the street, wonderful intoxicating sound north of 5,000 RPM, and a very attractive price point. A good original Boxster can still be purchased for under $20,000 in today's market. I can't imagine you could find something more fun for the money. However, if you have the opportunity, one of the new Boxster GTS cars are just unbelievable. You couple the spiritual connection to the original Boxster, add a significant amount more power, capability, handling, and technology, and you have a winner. So with that, get out and drive your Porsche.